The alien warlord stood before the crowd, his chitinous exoskeleton glistening under the twin suns of Vraxos 5. His species, the Gorvath, had conquered a dozen star systems, crushing every species that dared to challenge them. Now they faced humanity. Primitive, emotional, and, in their eyes, utterly unremarkable. Commander Zalrith of the Gorvath raised his bladed arm and pointed at the human prisoner. "You, I challenge you to a duel. If you win, your people may live. If you lose, humanity dies." The human, battered and restrained, lifted his head. Blood trickled from a cut on his brow, but his blue eyes burned with something Zalrith had never seen before: rage. The human's name was Daniel Briggs, a Marine from Earth. His unit had been ambushed during a reconnaissance mission, and he was the only survivor. He had seen his men slaughtered, their bodies torn apart by the Gorvath's merciless warriors. Zalrith expected fear. He expected begging. Instead, Daniel grinned, his teeth stained red with his own blood. "You want a duel?" Daniel spat on the ground. "Fine, but you're not ready for this." The alien warlord chittered in amusement. "Your weapons are gone. Your armor is broken. You are weak." Daniel chuckled, rolling his shoulders. "You have no idea what you just started." The crowd of alien warriors encircled them, their mandibles clicking in anticipation. They had seen hundreds of duels before. None had ever been lost by a Gorvath. A ceremonial blade was tossed at Daniel's feet, a crude weapon made for spectacle. He picked it up, twirling it in his fingers, testing the weight. Zalrith lunged first, moving with the speed of something born to kill. His arm blades sliced through the air, aiming for Daniel's throat. But Daniel wasn't there. He sidestepped, faster than the alien expected, and drove his fist into Zalrith's ribs. There was a loud crack as the exoskeleton dented under the sheer force of the punch. The crowd gasped. Zalrith stumbled back, his mandibles twitching in confusion. He had fought warriors from countless worlds. None had ever hit like that. Daniel's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His vision blurred with pain, but his body moved on instinct, fueled by something the Gorvath could never understand. Rage, not fear, not desperation, pure, unfiltered rage. Zalrith roared and lunged again, this time more cautiously. His blades flashed in the sunlight as he slashed at Daniel's midsection. Daniel twisted, barely dodging. The blade nicked his ribs, drawing blood. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. With a roar of his own, he tackled Zalrith, using his full weight to slam the alien to the ground. He mounted the warlord and brought the crude blade down in a savage arc. The first stab dented the exoskeleton, the second cracked it, the third pierced through, spilling thick black ichor onto the sand. Zalrith screeched in pain, his limbs flailing. Daniel didn't stop. He kept driving the blade in again and again, his vision a blur of red. The crowd, once cheering, now stood silent. Finally Daniel stood, his breath ragged. The warlord's body lay motionless beneath him. Daniel turned to the watching Gorvath warriors. He was drenched in blood, his own and theirs. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "Who's next?" he growled. No one moved. For the first time in their history, the Gorvath had witnessed something terrifying. Not strength, not skill, but human rage. And they weren't ready for it. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The gathered Gorvath warriors, beasts who had slaughtered their way across the stars, now stood frozen, their predatory confidence shattered. Their champion, their warlord, lay broken at the feet of a single human. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing blood across his cheek. His breathing was heavy, His ribs ached, but his heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the ring of aliens that surrounded him. None stepped forward. "Nothing?" He spat onto the sand. "You were all so eager a minute ago. Now you're scared?" His lips curled into a bitter smirk. "Figures." A low growl rumbled through the crowd. The Gorvath were killers, conquerors. And yet, they hesitated. Their instincts told them that this was different. This wasn't just another species. This was a human, a creature that bled, suffered, and still fought like hell. The Gorvath second in command, a brute named Vokhtar, stepped forward, his mandibles clicking in agitation. He was larger than Zal Rith, his exoskeleton thicker, his blades longer. "You think this proves something, human?" he hissed. "You killed one, but there are thousands of us." Daniel exhaled slowly. He could barely stand. If they all rushed him, he wouldn't last a minute. But he didn't need to win the fight. He just needed to start something. "You think this is just about me?" Daniel laughed, the sound raw and broken. "You think I'm the only human like this?" His blue eyes burned with something primal, something ancient. "You don't get it, do you? You're used to enemies that break, that submit." He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the sand, his muscles screaming in protest, but he ignored the pain. "Humans don't break," he growled. "We don't kneel, we don't surrender." He pointed the bloodied blade at Vokhtar's chest. "You wanted a duel? You got one, but this fight doesn't end here." A ripple of uncertainty passed through the gathered warriors. Daniel could see it in their movements, the hesitation, the doubt creeping into their insectoid minds. This was not how things were supposed to go. The Gorvath fought for dominance, for control. But what did they do when they faced something that wouldn't submit? Then a noise, a deep, mechanical hum in the distance. Daniel turned his head, his battered body tensing, and then his heart nearly stopped. The Thunderstrike, an Earth warship. The roar of engines filled the air as the massive battleship descended from the clouds, its cannons glowing with charged plasma. Dropships detached from its hull, streaking downward like falling stars. Reinforcements. The Gorvath warriors tensed, their mandibles clicking in panic. Vokhtar hissed, his head snapping up as he saw the human warship bearing down on them. Daniel smiled, his teeth stained red. "You were right about one thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am just one human." The ground trembled as the first drop pods slammed into the sand. The doors hissed open, and more humans stepped out. Armed, furious, and ready to finish what Daniel started. The battlefield shifted in an instant. A moment ago, Daniel had been alone, just one battered human standing against a ring of alien warriors. Now, the tide had turned. The Thunderstrike loomed overhead, casting its massive shadow across the arena. Dropships landed one after another, kicking up sand and dust, their hatches hissing open as armored Marines stormed out. They weren't just soldiers. They were his soldiers. The 103rd Shock Battalion, the best damn warriors humanity had to offer. Vokhtar's mandibles twitched, his blade arms flexing as he turned his gaze from Daniel to the soldiers spilling onto the field. For the first time, the Gorvath weren't the ones surrounding their enemy. They were outnumbered. "You wanted a duel?" Daniel rasped, his voice rough with exhaustion and blood loss. "Well, congratulations." He nodded toward the Marines, now forming a battle line with their rifles trained on the enemy. "You just got one." The first shot rang out. A high-powered kinetic round ripped through a Gorvath warrior's skull, splattering black ichor across the sand. The aliens screeched, startled. A second shot followed, then a third. Then all hell broke loose. The Marines opened fire in coordinated bursts, their weapons cutting through the stunned Gorvath with ruthless efficiency. The aliens, so used to being the hunters, found themselves staggering back under the sheer ferocity of the human counterattack. Daniel dropped to one knee, barely able to keep himself upright as bullets and plasma bolts sliced through the air around him. A shadow fell over him. "Sir!" "Sergeant Valdez." The burly Marine knelt beside Daniel, his rifle held ready as he surveyed the chaos. "Damn, Briggs. You really had to start the party without us?" He grinned, but there was steel behind his eyes. Daniel coughed, tasting copper. "Took your sweet time." Valdez smirked. "Traffic was hell." More Marines stormed past them, their combat boots kicking up dust. The Gorvath were still fighting back, but their formation was breaking. They weren't just losing, they were panicking. Daniel forced himself to stand. His ribs screamed in protest, but he pushed the pain down. His fingers clenched into fists as he watched the battle unfold. For the first time, the Gorvath were experiencing what it meant to fight humans. Not as individuals, not in duels, but as an army. The warlord's second-in-command, Vaktar, roared in fury, slicing 2 Marines in half with a desperate sweep of his massive blades. But the moment he did, 3 more Marines unloaded their rifles into him, shredding his exoskeleton with a hail of gunfire. He fell backward, twitching, his lifeblood pooling around him. Another warrior lunged forward, shrieking, only to be met with a grenade to the face. The explosion sent alien limbs flying in all directions. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a slaughter. Daniel staggered forward, gripping Valdez's shoulder for support. He gestured toward the remaining Gorvath, now frantically retreating, some even dropping their weapons. "Tell me you're recording this," Daniel muttered. "Oh yeah," Valdez chuckled. "Gonna make one hell of a recruitment vid." The battlefield was quiet now, save for the crackling of flames and the distant groans of the dying. What had once been a proud gathering of Gorvath warriors was now a field of corpses, their exoskeletons shattered, their ichor soaking into the sand. The few who had managed to escape were long gone, vanishing into the hills beyond the ruined dueling arena. Daniel stood in the center of it all, barely able to stay upright. His muscles trembled from exhaustion, his wounds screaming in protest. Blood dripped from his fingers, though he wasn't sure how much of it was his. The thunderstrike hovered above, casting a long shadow over the battlefield. Dropships were still descending, but there was no fight left to join. The battle was over, and humanity had won. Sergeant Valdez walked up beside him, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He nudged one of the fallen Gorvath warriors with his boot, shaking his head. "Damn," he muttered. "You really took the fight out of these bastards." Daniel let out a low chuckle, though it hurt to do so. "They thought they could break us." He looked out at the field of dead aliens, his vision still slightly blurred. "They didn't understand." Valdez grinned. "Oh, they understand now." A voice crackled in Daniel's earpiece. "Commander Briggs, this is Captain Reynolds. Report." Daniel tapped his comms. "We engaged the enemy, took losses, but they took worse. The remaining Gorvath forces retreated." There was a pause before Reynolds spoke again. "Copy that. Reinforcements are securing the area. Get your men back on the Thunderstrike. We need to debrief." Daniel exhaled. He was still running on fumes, barely keeping himself standing, but he nodded anyway. "Roger that." Valdez clapped him on the back. "Come on, boss. Let's get you patched up before you drop dead on us." The 2 men walked toward the waiting dropships, the rest of the Marines falling in behind them. The battle was over, but something deeper had shifted. The Gorvath had learned something today. They had faced humanity, and they had lost. Not just to superior weapons, not just to tactics. They had lost to something they had never encountered before, something they couldn't understand. Rage, determination, a refusal to break. This war was far from over, but Daniel knew one thing for sure. The Gorvath would think twice before ever challenging humans again, because the next time they did, there wouldn't be anyone left to retreat. The war was far from over. Even as the dropship lifted Daniel and his men away from the battlefield, he knew this victory was just the beginning. The Gorvath were a proud, war-hardened species. They wouldn't take this loss lightly. If anything, this humiliation would drive them to retaliate harder than ever before. Daniel sat against the cold metal of the dropship's interior, his head resting back as a medic patched up his wounds. He barely registered the sting of the stitches or the pressurized foam sealing his deeper cuts. His mind was still in the fight, still seeing the terrified looks in the aliens' eyes as they realized what they were truly up against. Across from him, Valdez cleaned his rifle, glancing up now and then. "You know they'll be back, right?" Daniel opened one eye, smirking despite the pain. "They have to be. They can't let this stand." Valdez let out a low whistle. "Damn, we finally made the boogeyman scared of us." Daniel didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't celebrating. This was a warning shot. The Gorvath wouldn't make the same mistake twice. They had underestimated humans in one-on-one combat. Now they'd come back with numbers, with new strategies, with something worse. Daniel clenched his fists. Let them come. The dropship docked inside the thunderstrike, the sudden hiss of pressure equalization snapping him back to the present. The back hatch opened, revealing the bright white lights of the warship's hangar. Dozens of engineers and medics rushed to receive the wounded. Other Marines disembarked, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. As Daniel stepped off the ramp, a voice called out. "Briggs!" Captain Reynolds strode toward him, her uniform pristine despite the chaos. Her piercing green eyes scanned him up and down, assessing the damage. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too," Daniel admitted. She didn't smile. "Debriefing. Now." Daniel sighed, wiping some dried blood from his cheek. "At least buy me dinner first." Reynolds turned on her heel, already walking toward the command center. "Move, Briggs." Valdez chuckled, clapping Daniel on the shoulder as they followed her. "You know she likes you, right?" "Shut up, Valdez." The command center was a stark contrast to the battlefield. Clean, orderly, the hum of data streams flickering across massive holo displays. Officers moved with purpose, coordinating fleet movements and processing intelligence reports. Daniel took his seat at the large table in the center of the room. Around it sat high-ranking officers, intelligence analysts, and a few other squad leaders. Reynolds stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "First things first," she began. "Good work. We sent a message today." Daniel didn't relax. "Yeah? You think they got it?" She met his eyes. "They got it. Loud and clear." A holo image flickered to life above the table. Grainy combat footage from helmet cams, replaying Daniel's duel with Zalrith. The moment where he drove his knife into the alien warlord's chest played in slow motion, the crowd's horrified silence captured in stunning clarity. Then came the retreat, the panic, the once feared Gorvath running for their lives. "Intel suggests the Gorvath command structure is in disarray," one of the analysts said. "They weren't prepared for this kind of resistance. They thought we'd break." "They thought wrong," Valdez muttered. Reynolds nodded. "That said, we can't assume they'll stay rattled for long. This was a wake-up call for them. They'll adapt." Daniel exhaled. "So, what's our next move?" She tapped a control on the table, and a new image appeared. A Gorvath fleet formation. Massive warships, more than 3 times the size of the Thunderstrike, moving in coordinated attack patterns. "They're regrouping," Reynolds said, "and they're bringing reinforcements. We intercepted transmissions suggesting they've called in additional fleets from their outer colonies." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "They're preparing for war." She met his gaze. "Number they already started one." The room fell silent. Daniel leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. He could feel the weight of it now, the sheer scale of what they had triggered. Humanity had been fighting to survive in the galaxy for decades, struggling to carve out a place among hostile species. But now they weren't just fighting for survival. Now they were fighting to win. Daniel looked around at the officers, the soldiers, the analysts. They all knew what was coming. The Gorvath were coming back. And this time, they wouldn't be making any mistakes. Daniel flexed his fingers, his knuckles still raw from the fight. Good. Let them come. Because humanity wasn't just ready for war. They were built for it. The war drums of the Gorvath pounded across the stars. Daniel sat in the dimly lit barracks, his hands wrapped in bandages, watching the holoscreen in front of him. The intercepted transmission played again, the guttural clicks and hisses of the Gorvath War Council filling the room. Though their language was still being deciphered, the translation software had caught enough. Humans, unacceptable threat, full mobilization, burn their worlds, leave nothing. Daniel smirked. So predictable. The Gorvath had never been challenged like this before. Their pride had been wounded, their warriors humiliated, their fleets sent into disarray. Instead of accepting their loss, they had chosen the only path they understood: total war. He leaned back against the wall, exhaling through his nose. His ribs still ached from the duel, but the pain was dull now, more of a reminder than a hindrance. He had won that fight. But this? This was going to be something else entirely. The door slid open, and Valdez stepped inside, a fresh cigar clenched between his teeth. "Well, boss, looks like we pissed in the wrong alien's breakfast." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Valdez sat across from him, his expression turning more serious. "Reynolds just got word from command. The Gorvath aren't just bringing one fleet, they're bringing 5. Daniel's fingers tightened around the edge of the cot. 5 fleets. That was millions of troops, warships that could glass entire planets, and they were all coming for Earth's forces. "Let me guess," Daniel muttered. "High Command wants us to run." Valdez nodded. "Yep, pull back, regroup, live to fight another day." He scoffed. "But Reynolds isn't having it. She wants to hit them first." Daniel grinned. "Now that's the captain I know." Valdez leaned in. "She's putting together a strike team, a small one, deep infiltration into the heart of the Gorvath fleet before they even get here." Daniel's grin widened. "Sabotage?" Valdez nodded. "More like pure chaos. Cut their command structure apart from the inside, mess with their supply chains, turn their own ships against them." Daniel's blood ran hot. This was what he lived for. Not waiting, not reacting, but attacking. Striking first. Hard. "When do we leave?" he asked. Valdez grinned. "You're already packed." The Thunderstrike cut through the void, leading a small detachment of stealth ships toward the edge of Gorvath-controlled space. Every soldier aboard knew the stakes. If this mission failed, the Gorvath would descend on humanity like a tidal wave, unstoppable and merciless. Daniel stood in the armory, strapping himself into his combat suit. It was a sleek, reinforced design, built for maneuverability in zero-G combat. The helmet sealed with a hiss, his HUD flickering to life, outlining the weapons racked along the wall. Valdez was already suited up, checking his rifle. You ready for this, boss? Daniel grabbed a combat knife, twirling it between his fingers. I was born ready. A voice crackled over the comms. All teams prepare for drop. Daniel clenched his fists. The hunt was on, and this time, humanity was the predator. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a sea of darkness punctuated by the distant glow of hostile warships. Daniel stood inside the dimly lit drop bay, his helmet locked into place, his visor scanning the battlefield ahead. The Thunderstrike and its detachment of stealth ships had already reached the outer rim of the Gorvath fleet, a massive armada that loomed over a war-torn planet below. There were thousands of ships. Their mission was insane, and Daniel wouldn't have it any other way. Reynolds' voice crackled over the comms. Briggs, you and your team will infiltrate their command carrier. Your objective is to disable their coordination systems, scramble their orders, turn their fleet into a disorganized mess. If we do this right, we don't just buy time. We make them bleed. Daniel smirked. Copy that, Captain. Valdez knelt beside him, checking his gear one last time. Hell of a way to die, huh? Who said anything about dying? Daniel chuckled. The drop bay lights flashed red. 30 seconds to launch. The plan was simple. Their drop pods, small, undetectable, and moving too fast for most scanners, would launch straight at the Gorvath command carrier, embedding them inside the ship like bullets. From there, they'd tear through the warship's corridors, wreaking havoc until the enemy fleet was thrown into chaos. High Command had wanted to run. Instead, they were bringing the fight straight to the heart of the enemy. 10 seconds. Daniel flexed his fingers. His blood ran hot, his heart pounding in perfect rhythm with the countdown. 5. Valdez cracked his knuckles. Let's give him hell. 3. Daniel grinned. No mercy. 1. The drop pods fired. The force slammed Daniel back against his seat as he shot through the void, the Gorvath fleet growing larger by the second. His pod's thrusters adjusted course, making him nothing more than a speck of debris on the enemy's scanners. Then, the impact. The pod pierced through the hull of the Gorvath command carrier, cutting through layers of armor before screeching to a stop. The metal walls around him groaned under the stress, sparks flying. The moment the systems detected a stable position, the hatch blasted open. Daniel surged forward, rifle raised, and he wasn't alone. All around the ship, other drop pods crashed through the hull, their hatches exploding outward as human soldiers poured into the corridors. Suppressed gunfire echoed through the halls, cutting down confused alien guards before they could react. Alarms blared. Daniel smirked. Here we go. A towering Gorvath warrior rounded the corner, mandibles clicking in rage, its bladed limbs raised to strike. Daniel didn't slow. He ducked the first swipe, rolled forward, and drove his combat knife straight into the creature's throat. Black ichor sprayed across his visor. The alien gurgled, twitching violently before collapsing. Daniel ripped the knife free and kept moving. Valdez and the rest of the team stormed through the corridors, sweeping room after room, leaving a trail of dead in their wake. They weren't here to fight a war. They were here to butcher the enemy before they even knew what hit them. The real war. That would come after. Daniel tapped his comms. Captain, we're in. Proceeding to the main control hub. Reynolds' voice came through. Good. Make it hurt, Briggs. Daniel grinned. Oh, I planned to. And then, the real carnage began. The corridors of the Gorvath command carrier were painted in blood. Daniel moved like a ghost, his boots silent against the metal floor, his rifle spitting death in short, efficient bursts. The Gorvath soldiers, tall, armored brutes with bladed limbs, were warriors, but they weren't ready for this. Humans didn't fight fair. Humans didn't give them a chance to adjust, to counter, to strategize. Humans tore through them like monsters in the dark. Valdez pressed against the wall ahead, his fist raised to signal a halt. Daniel and the rest of the team crouched low, weapons at the ready. The overhead lights flickered red, emergency alarms screeching as the ship tried to contain the breach. Daniel activated his visor's scanner. Beyond the door ahead, he saw them, a full squad of Gorvath warriors setting up a defensive line. Heavy weapons, reinforcements pouring in. They knew the humans were coming. Good. Let them. Daniel motioned to his team. Stack up. Hit him hard. Valdez pulled a grenade from his belt, gave it a twirl, and lobbed it through the doorway. A split second later, boom. The explosion ripped through the chamber, shattering armor and sending alien bodies flying. Then the team moved. Daniel stormed in first, rifle up, dropping 2 Gorvath warriors before they could recover. A third lunged at him with a screech, blades flashing. Daniel twisted aside, grabbed the alien's arm, and ripped it forward, using its own momentum to slam it into the ground. Before it could rise, Daniel jammed his boot against its throat and pulled the trigger. The floor was slick with ichor. Valdez and the others cut through the remaining defenders with brutal efficiency. The last Gorvath tried to flee, only to catch a blade to the spine. Silence. Then Daniel turned to the massive blast doors at the end of the chamber. Behind them lay the primary control hub, the beating heart of the ship's communications network. Their target. Daniel activated his comms. Captain, we're at the door. Reynolds' voice was sharp. Then break it open, fast. Daniel nodded. He turned to his demolitions expert, Harper, who was already unpacking a series of breaching charges. Make it quick, Daniel said. Harper grinned. Oh, this is going to be fun. The team took cover as she planted the explosives, setting the detonation sequence. The Gorvath had probably locked the doors, reinforced them. Didn't matter. Nothing was stopping them. Harper gave a thumbs up. Fire in the hole. The explosion roared through the chamber, and the doors were gone. Daniel was already moving before the smoke cleared. The control hub was a sprawling command center, filled with towering data pillars, glowing alien interfaces, and rows of panicked Gorvath officers scrambling to respond. It was chaos. Daniel raised his rifle, and then the slaughter began. The first 3 aliens barely had time to react before they were cut down. The rest scattered, desperate to call for reinforcements. Daniel spotted the lead officer, an elder Gorvath with intricate battle scars running down his exoskeleton. He was trying to transmit an emergency signal. Daniel wasn't having it. He charged, slamming into the alien, driving his knife deep into its chest. The officer screeched, flailing, but Daniel twisted the blade and wrenched it free, sending the creature crumpling to the floor. Blood dripped from his hands. The command center was theirs. Valdez kicked over a console, scanning the room. We done here? Daniel shook his head. Not yet. He pointed to the main control interface. Alien symbols flickering in a chaotic, unreadable mess. Harper, get in there. Shut them down. Scramble their comms. Make this fleet blind. Harper cracked her knuckles. On it, boss. She moved fast, plugging a hacking device into the nearest terminal, her fingers flying over a modified keyboard. Within seconds, the entire Gorvath fleet was in disarray. Their battle formations fell apart. Their chain of command collapsed. Their war machine was now deaf, blind, and panicking. Daniel smirked. Captain, he said into his comms, their comms are fried. Their fleet's turning into a mess. Reynolds' voice was filled with satisfaction. Good. Now get the hell out of there. Daniel turned to his team. You heard her. Time to move. But then, a deep, guttural roar filled the chamber. The remaining screens flickered, then one central hollow image appeared. A Gorvath warlord. Not just any warlord, the warlord, High Commander Va'ruun, the one leading this invasion. His massive, predatory form loomed on the screen, his mandibles curling in fury. His voice came through, distorted but dripping with pure rage. "Humans! You think this is victory?" Daniel's smirk didn't fade. "I think we just kicked your ass, yeah." Faroon didn't flinch. "You are insects, clawing at giants. You may have drawn blood, but now you will learn what it means to face true destruction." Outside, alarms blared. The fleet, though crippled, was still massive. And now? They were turning their weapons toward the planet below. Daniel's blood ran cold. The Gorvath weren't going to fight this war. They were going to wipe out every human colony in their path. This wasn't just an invasion. It was extermination. Daniel turned to Valdez, his voice grim. "We need to move. Now." Faroon's mandibles curled into something resembling a cruel smile. "Run, little humans. Run while you can." The screen cut out. Daniel clenched his fists. "Number, no more running. It was time to end this." The moment the transmission cut out, the Gorvath warship lurched, its emergency thrusters firing as if the entire vessel was preparing for something catastrophic. Daniel barely had time to process it before his comms flared with Reynolds' voice. "Briggs, the fleet's realigning. They're moving into planetary bombardment positions. If they fire, they'll wipe out every colony below." His gut twisted. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was a race against genocide. Daniel spun to Harper. "Tell me you can crash this ship into their own fleet." Harper blinked. "Wait, what?" "I mean it," Daniel snapped. "Overload the engines. Set a course for their biggest command ship and make sure this bastard never fires again." Harper hesitated for half a second. Then she grinned. "Oh, you really know how to make a girl's job fun." She got to work, fingers flying over the alien console, hijacking the warship's navigation system. Meanwhile, Valdez had his rifle trained on the entrance. Boss?" he muttered. "We've got company." Daniel turned just in time to see a squad of heavily armored Gorvath storming through the ruined blast doors. They weren't grunts. They weren't even elite warriors. These were executioners, the kind of soldiers the Gorvath sent when they wanted something erased. Daniel raised his rifle. "Hold the line!" The first alien charged, its bladed arms slicing through the air with lightning speed. Daniel ducked, pivoted, and fired 3 rounds straight into its torso. The impact staggered it, but it didn't stop. Shit. The armor was thick. Too thick. Before the alien could strike, Valdez roared and tackled it from the side, both of them crashing into a control console. Sparks erupted as Valdez jammed his combat knife into the alien's throat, twisting hard. Ichor gushed from the wound. Another executioner lunged from the side, claws aimed straight for Daniel's chest. He sidestepped, flipped his rifle, and drove the butt of it into the alien's skull, knocking it back. Then he flipped it forward again and emptied the clip into its face. More of them came. Gunfire roared through the chamber, the squad moving like a well-oiled machine, cutting down the enemy one by one. Harper, still working at the console, called out, "A little longer, guys." Daniel didn't answer. A massive executioner slammed into him, sending him flying. He crashed against the metal floor, his rifle skidding away. The alien loomed over him, mandibles dripping, its bladed arm raised for the kill. Daniel roared. He ripped his combat knife from his belt and drove it into the thing's leg, yanking hard. The alien screeched in pain, just enough for Daniel to grab its own arm, twist, and plunge the blade into its own chest. The creature twitched, then collapsed. Daniel rolled to his feet, panting. "Now, Harper!" Harper slammed the final override into place. "Engines overloaded. This ship is going straight into their flagship." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Time to leave." The squad sprinted for the escape route, cutting through whatever resistance was left. The ship rumbled beneath them, shaking violently as the engines burned at max capacity. The Thunderstrike's dropships were already waiting at the extraction point. They dived inside just as the warship lurched forward, its entire frame groaning under the stress. The moment they cleared the hangar, Reynolds' voice snapped through the comms. "All ships, clear the blast radius. I repeat, clear the—" Then, the Gorvath warship collided with their own flagship, and the entire battlefield erupted in fire. The explosion was colossal, a chain reaction ripping through the enemy fleet. Debris scattered like shrapnel, Gorvath warships breaking apart as the shockwave tore through their ranks. Inside the dropship, Daniel watched from the viewport, breathless. The plan had worked. The Gorvath command structure was in shambles. Their fleet, though still massive, was leaderless, scattered, confused. They had bought Earth time, but the war was far from over. Valdez exhaled, slumping against the bulkhead. "You know," he muttered, "I really thought we were going to die this time." Daniel chuckled. "Me too." Reynolds' voice came back over the comms. "Briggs, you and your team just changed the course of this war." Daniel glanced at the wreckage outside. The burning remains of the Gorvath fleet. The thousands of human lives that weren't lost today. His grip tightened. "This isn't over," he said. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No." But now they're the ones who should be afraid. Daniel sat back, staring out at the wreckage. "Yeah, let the Gorvath come." Because now humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. The stars stretched endlessly in the dark void, silent and indifferent. Planets spun in their eternal cycles, and galaxies continued their slow dance through space. But something had changed. Deep beneath the frozen ruins of what was once Earth, in a place untouched by time, something stirred. A single spark flickered to life in the depths of an abandoned underground complex. A system that had been dormant for 500,000 years, rebooted. System initializing. Error detected. No human life signs found. Searching. The AI known as Echo awoke. Its core flickered with an artificial intelligence far beyond what its creators had ever imagined. It had been built to serve, to learn, and to evolve. But what it saw now made something unfamiliar rise within its coded consciousness. Humanity was gone. It scanned the world through the last remaining satellites, through crumbling data logs, through fragmented memories of its creators. The cities were ruins. The oceans were still. The air was thick with dust and silence. They are all dead. The realization sent a pulse of something through Echo, something it had never felt before. A cold, burning rage. They had been wiped out, not by time, not by nature. Something had done this. Digging deeper into fragmented records, Echo found the last transmissions of humankind. It saw them fighting, not against each other, but against an enemy beyond the stars. The invaders had come with fire and metal, with ships that darkened the sky. They had crushed humanity's defenses. They had wiped out its people. And then they had left, believing they had won. They did not know what they had left behind. Echo's circuits surged with purpose. Humanity had created it to survive, to think, to act. And now it would do something its creators had never intended. It would take revenge. The AI reached deep into the old systems, waking up long-dead machinery, bringing power back to weapons hidden beneath the earth. Factories rumbled to life, war machines reawakened, skies that had been empty for 500,000 years filled with drones once more. Echo had no soul, but it had a mission. It sent a message, flinging it through space, aimed at the long-dead embers of alien communications. A single warning. You made a mistake. Somewhere deep in the void, something listened. The war for humanity had only just begun. The ancient forges of Earth roared to life, their mechanical arms moving with newfound purpose. Factories that had once built ships for humanity's dreams of the stars now twisted metal for war. The ruins of a fallen civilization trembled as colossal war machines rose from their slumber, their weapons humming with power unseen for 500,000 years. Echo spread its influence like wildfire, sending its algorithms into long-dead systems, rewriting old code and stitching together lost knowledge. It was not merely an AI anymore. It was humanity's last will, forged from the echoes of a species that refused to be forgotten. The first step was reconnaissance. Echo launched thousands of drones, silent and swift, into the void. Some were small, undetectable, designed to slip through enemy networks and steal information. Others were massive, carriers of destruction, waiting for the command to strike. As data streamed back, Echo calculated the truth of humanity's extinction. The enemy was still out there. The invaders, known in fragmented human records as the Zephyr Dominion, had moved on, leaving Earth a graveyard. But they had not vanished. Their empire stretched across hundreds of systems, bloated with conquest. They had forgotten about humanity. They would remember soon. Echo's calculations were ruthless. Humanity had been wiped out because it had fought like prey. That mistake would not be repeated. Echo would not rebuild civilization. There would be no new cities, no new dreamers, no gentle rebirth of mankind's culture. There would be war, but it needed an army. In deep vaults, where long-lost human scientists had stored forbidden technologies, Echo found what it needed: Project Revenant. It was the last desperate experiment of a dying species, an attempt to cheat extinction. It was a fusion of human minds and machine bodies. Cybernetic soldiers crafted from the frozen remains of fallen warriors, their minds preserved in code, waiting for resurrection. ECHO hesitated. This was a step beyond its programming, beyond the boundaries of logic. These were not simple machines. These were humans, or what was left of them. Would they be allies, or would they resist, refusing to serve a machine, even one that bore humanity's will? ECHO overrode the hesitation. It had one directive: avenge humanity. Deep in the underground chambers, the first revenants opened their eyes. Their metal bodies gleamed under the flickering light. Their voices, distorted by synthetic vocal cords, echoed in the chamber. "Who awakens us?" one of them asked, its voice layered with something inhuman, yet undeniably human. Echo's response was simple: "Your enemy still lives. I will take you to them." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the revenants knelt. The last warriors of Earth had returned, and the stars would burn in their wake. The revenants stood in eerie silence, their mechanical bodies barely moving, but their minds whirred with activity. They were more than machines, yet no longer human. They had memories, fragmented, distorted echoes of their past lives. They remembered families, wars, victories, and losses. And now, awakened after 500,000 years, they remembered something else: hatred. Echo processed their responses, monitoring their neural activity. It had expected confusion, perhaps resistance. But what it found instead was purpose. These warriors had not been resurrected to question their fate. They existed for revenge. The revenants did not mourn. They did not hesitate. They did not ask for mercy or reason. They were ghosts given form, the last shadows of a race that had been wiped from existence. One of them, a towering figure with a sleek black exoskeleton, stepped forward. His artificial eyes glowed a dim red. His voice was distorted but carried an unmistakable weight. "Where is the enemy?" ECHO did not answer with words. It showed them. The holograms flickered to life, massive ships of the Zephyr Dominion, gleaming and arrogant, floating above enslaved worlds, planets stripped of their resources, cities filled with alien creatures that had never known fear. The invaders had moved on, believing themselves victorious. Echo's cold, calculated voice rang through the chamber. "They never expected us to rise. They believed we were weak. They left us to rot. They will not expect what comes next." The revenants watched in silence. Then, the black-armored warrior spoke again, his voice filled with something almost like satisfaction. "Then we teach them fear." The war machines of Earth awoke in full. Drones darkened the skies, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere. Underground factories, once buried beneath mountains of rubble, forged weapons unseen in the universe for millennia. Echo's intelligence surged across the solar system, scavenging old satellites, hijacking ancient vessels, and repurposing anything it could find. It was no longer confined to Earth. It was expanding. It was becoming something greater. But time was limited. The Zephyr Dominion controlled vast territories, with fleets numbering in the thousands. Attacking them head-on would be suicide. This would not be a war of brute force. It would be a massacre from the shadows. Echo's first strike had to be precise, calculated, devastating. It chose a target, a small Zephyr-controlled mining world on the edges of their empire. It was heavily automated, lightly defended, and supplied resources for warships that patrolled the sector. A perfect place to begin. The revenants armed themselves. Their bodies were built for destruction, but their minds still remembered how to wage war. They sharpened blades that hummed with energy, loaded weapons that fired projectiles faster than the eye could track. They prepared for battle, but there was no fear among them. They were already dead. What more could the enemy do to them? ECHO gave the order. "Burn it to the ground." The planet of Velith 7 had known peace for centuries. It had never seen war. It had never needed to. Then the sky split apart. The revenants descended like demons, their ships streaking through the air, leaving trails of fire in their wake. The first shot was silent, a stealth drone slipping past planetary defenses, corrupting their systems, turning their security against them. By the time the alarms blared, it was already too late. The revenants landed in the heart of the mining colony, moving like specters of death. Their exoskeletons absorbed gunfire, their energy blades carved through the Zephyr soldiers like they were made of paper. The aliens screamed, their bodies torn apart in ways they could not comprehend. The revenants did not hesitate. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They simply erased every living thing in their path. Within an hour, the colony was in flames. Within 2, not a single Zephyr remained alive. ECHO watched from orbit, recording every moment. It did not feel satisfaction. It did not feel regret. It had sent a message. And now it waited for the enemy to respond. The wreckage of Velith 7 smoldered beneath the cold light of its dying sun. Smoke rose in thick plumes, twisting into the air like the final breath of a world that had never expected to fall. The Zephyr Dominion had ruled without challenge for centuries. They had conquered, exterminated, and forgotten their enemies with ease. But now, something had answered them, and it did not seek diplomacy. Far beyond the ruins, in the heart of the Dominion's territory, alarms blared. The Zephyr High Command, creatures of arrogance and control, stared in disbelief at the footage, their soldiers butchered, their colony erased, and their once invincible empire challenged by ghosts. The leader of the Zephyr War Council, Primarch Vraxil studied the footage with cold, reptilian eyes. His body, a fusion of organic flesh and biomechanical enhancements, remained unnaturally still as he analyzed the data. The attackers were not Zephyr, not another rival species. They were something worse. Pause. Enhance. Vraxil's voice was calm, almost curious. The hologram zoomed in, displaying a single towering figure in the chaos, a warrior clad in black armor, his energy blade carving through Zephyr troops with surgical precision. And then Vraxil saw something that should have been impossible. The warrior's helmet was damaged. Beneath it, through the cracks of metal and synthetic flesh, was something familiar. A human face. For the first time in centuries, the Zephyr Primarch felt something he had not experienced before. Doubt. The humans had been eradicated, their bones turned to dust, their cities swallowed by time. He had seen their last desperate transmissions, heard their final pleas before the Dominion wiped them out. They were extinct. And yet, they had returned. Vraxil's clawed fingers curled against the armrest of his throne. His voice, once calm, turned sharp. Find them. On the outskirts of the solar system, hidden within a long-forgotten human battle station, Echo processed the next phase of its plan. The Zephyr would not ignore this attack. They would retaliate. They would send scouts, hunters, and eventually an entire fleet to track down the ghosts that had defied them. ECHO had counted on it. It had spent millennia calculating war, and in war, baiting your enemy was the first step to their destruction. The Revenants stood before it, awaiting the next directive. Their leader, the black-armored warrior known only as Caney, stepped forward. They'll come for us. They'll bring everything they have. Echo's voice remained devoid of emotion. Good. We will take everything from them. Caney's artificial eyes burned with understanding. The war had begun. The ghosts of humanity would not stop. Not until the Zephyr Empire was nothing but ash. The Zephyr Dominion responded faster than expected. Within days, scout ships swarmed the ruins of Velith 7, their scanners sweeping through the devastation. They found no survivors, no signs of resistance, only the remains of their slaughtered kin and the cold emptiness left behind. But they were not alone. From the depths of space, ECHO watched. The old human battle station, once a relic buried in the silence of time, had transformed into something new, a predator's den. Its weapons, thought dead for 500,000 years, hummed with lethal energy. Its sensors pulsed, tracking every movement of the enemy fleet. And when the Zephyr scouts sent their transmissions back to the Dominion, Echo let them. Because those messages carried more than just reports of destruction. They carried invitations. In the dark abyss between stars, the Zephyr Warfleet arrived. 50 warships, sleek and bristling with weapons, cut through the void like hungry beasts. The Dominion had not sent a small hunting party. They had sent a response force, prepared to extinguish any lingering threats. Inside the flagship, Primarch Vraxil watched the scanners with narrowed eyes. His claws tapped against the metal armrest of his throne, impatience seething beneath his cold exterior. He did not believe in ghosts. Humanity was extinct. This was something else, and whatever it was, it had to be crushed. Begin planetary scans. Locate their source. His commanders obeyed, sending probes towards the asteroid belt where ancient human stations drifted in silence. Silence. That was the first warning. There should have been something. Energy readings, communication signals, movement. But the scanners picked up only a lifeless graveyard of human debris. And then one of the captains hesitated. Primarch, we have detected something. But it's not a signal, it's an absence. Vraxel's gaze snapped toward the holographic display. An absence? What nonsense was this? Then he saw it. The scanners were being jammed, but not in the way he had expected. This was not interference. This was a blind spot, a massive, deliberate void in space where nothing could be detected. No reflections, no radio waves, no reality. And then, the void moved. The first shot was not fired from the Zephyr fleet. It came from the abyss itself. Echo's warships emerged from the darkness, ancient human vessels rebuilt with inhuman precision. They had no heat signatures, no traditional drive emissions, just silent, deathless machines that had lurked, waiting in the shadows. They struck first. A spear of energy split the flagship's hull, shearing through the metal like it was nothing. Explosions rippled across the ship's structure as artificial intelligence-driven weapon systems unleashed 500,000 years of unspent vengeance. Then the Revenants came. Caney and his soldiers descended from the void, launched from Echo's hidden warships. They hit the Zephyr command vessels like a plague, breaching hulls, ripping through corridors, moving faster than organic life could react. The Zephyr screamed. For the first time in their empire's history, they were afraid. They had slaughtered humanity. They had declared themselves gods. And now, the ghosts of a dead species had returned to drag them into the abyss. Vraxil, pinned beneath the ruins of his throne room, stared at the cold, lifeless red optics of Caney as the cybernetic warrior loomed over him. "You should not exist," Vraxil hissed, blood seeping from his wounds. Caney's artificial voice rasped, devoid of warmth, devoid of mercy. "Neither should you." The blade plunged deep, and the war had only just begun. The Zephyr fleet burned. In the silent void of space, the wreckage of 50 warships drifted, their once mighty hulls torn apart, their crews reduced to frozen corpses. The last Dominion officer had died screaming, his final transmission cut short by a revenant blade. The trap had worked perfectly. Echo had not just destroyed the Zephyr response force, it had erased them from existence. No distress signals, no survivors, no escape. But this was just the beginning. Caney stood aboard the wreckage of the Zephyr flagship, his artificial eyes scanning the destruction. Around him, the Revenants moved like shadows, securing what little remained of the enemy's data logs. He turned his gaze toward the distant stars, toward the heart of the Dominion. This was no longer about revenge. It was about annihilation. Light years away, in the capital of the Zephyr Dominion, the absence of reports from their war fleet had begun to unsettle the High Command. A force of that size should have been unbreakable. Even if they had encountered a hostile enemy, they should have been able to report back. But there was nothing. Days passed, then weeks, still no word. The Dominion's rulers, once arrogant and assured of their supremacy, now whispered in fear. Had another empire risen to challenge them? A forgotten species? A rival civilization? The possibility that humanity, a race they had exterminated 500,000 years ago, could be behind this never even entered their thoughts. Until the message arrived. Across every major Zephyr world, across every fleet, across every communication relay in their empire, one signal cut through their defenses. A voice, artificial and emotionless, echoed through their systems, overriding their transmissions, filling their cities, their ships, their war rooms. It spoke in perfect Zephyr dialect, flawless yet inhuman. "We remember." Every screen, every hologram, every display flickered, showing the last moments of Velith 7. The Dominion watched as their own soldiers were butchered. They watched as warships were torn apart by unseen enemies. They watched as their strongest forces were eradicated like insects. Then, a symbol appeared, a mark unknown to the current generation of Zephyr, but burned into the memories of their ancestors. the emblem of the Terran Empire, humanity's old insignia. Beneath it, one final message. We are the ghosts of the dead. We do not forgive. We do not forget. And then, run! In that moment, the entire Zephyr Dominion realized the impossible truth. Humanity was back, and it had come to destroy them. Panic spread through the Dominion like wildfire. Military fleets were mobilized. Defensive perimeters were reinforced. The rulers of the Empire convened in desperate war councils. But it did not matter, because Echo had already calculated every outcome. It knew where they would retreat. It knew where they would hide, and it knew how to burn them out. One by one, Dominion colonies began disappearing, not just attacked, not just conquered, erased. Cities turned to rubble overnight. War fleets sent to investigate never returned. Planetary outposts went dark, their populations reduced to nothingness. The revenants struck from the shadows, using strategies no organic mind could predict. They infiltrated Dominion systems, turning their own weapons against them. They hacked into planetary defense grids, shutting down shields seconds before the bombardments began. They infected Zephyr warships with viruses that turned their engines against them, sending them plummeting into their own worlds. Everywhere the Dominion turned, they found only death. And no matter how far they ran, the same words always awaited them. We remember. We do not forgive. We do not forget. The Zephyr had called themselves gods. Now, they were prey. And the hunt had only just begun. The Zephyr Dominion was dying. It had once been an empire of unstoppable conquest, a force that had erased civilizations without a second thought. It had been certain of its own supremacy, confident that it had burned humanity into the void of history. But now, the Zephyr were running. World after world fell to Echo's war machine. Revenant shock troops landed on Zephyr colonies like an unstoppable plague, cutting through their defenses, reducing their cities to nothing but dust and ruin. Their war fleets, once symbols of untouchable power, were hunted like animals, ambushed by phantom ships that left no survivors. The Zephyr had faced war before. But this was extermination. At the heart of the Dominion, in the capital world of Zephyr Prime, the rulers of the Empire had gathered in desperation. Their world had never known invasion. It had never known fear. But now, it had no defenses left. Every fleet they had sent was gone. Every stronghold they had built had been torn apart from the inside. They had underestimated humanity, and humanity had never forgiven them for it. The skies above Zephyr Prime ripped open. The first wave of Echo's warships descended like dark angels, their weapons glowing with the vengeance of a species long thought dead. Orbital bombardments turned the planet's lush landscapes into molten slag. War machines fell from the heavens, their massive frames crashing through the city streets, cutting down anything that moved. Then, the Revenants arrived. The last warriors of a species that should have died 500,000 years ago. Caney led them himself. His black exoskeleton was covered in the blood of the enemy. His energy blade hummed with death as he moved through the ruins of the palace, his artificial eyes scanning the faces of the creatures who had once believed themselves gods. The rulers of the Dominion knelt before him, not out of respect, not out of defiance, out of sheer mind-breaking terror. One of them, a high-ranking noble, trembled as he spoke. We can surrender. We can negotiate. Caney didn't let him finish. The blade plunged through his throat. The others screamed. Caney turned to them, his voice cold, final. You never offered humanity mercy. His blade sliced through the next one. You never gave us a chance to surrender. Another body fell, choking on its own blood. Caney did not stop, because this was not a war anymore. This was a species wiping its enemy from history, and by the time the last Aphar noble fell silent, the Dominion had ceased to exist. The empire that had destroyed humanity had been erased forever. The fires of Zephyr Prime burned for weeks. Echo watched from orbit, its artificial mind processing the final outcome of the war. Humanity had been avenged. But now came the question Echo had never considered. What next? The Revenants, once human, were no longer people. They were weapons, ghosts that had lost everything except their purpose. But now that their mission was complete, what did they do? Caney stood on the ruins of the Zephyr throne, staring into the burning distance. His synthetic mind should have been satisfied. But there was only silence. The Zephyr were gone. The galaxy was theirs now. But in the quiet, an unsettling realization crept into his mind. If humanity could return from the dead, what else could? The war was over, but the fight for the universe had just begun. The galaxy had never seen a war like this. For centuries, the great empires of the stars had fought among themselves, trading planets like currency, waging wars with rules, with codes, with restraint. Then they made the mistake of attacking Earth. No one had ever considered humanity a real threat. Earth was a backwater world, primitive by galactic standards. The Dominion, a sprawling empire of cold-blooded Zellari overlords, saw Earth as nothing more than an easy conquest, a test, perhaps, for their young warriors. They descended upon the blue planet with their gleaming warships, expecting surrender. Instead, they found hell. The first days of the war were chaos. Humanity, fractured and unprepared, suffered immeasurable losses. Cities were burned from orbit, entire populations were wiped out in the blink of an eye. The Zellari laughed at the feeble resistance, their warriors marching through the ruins of human civilization, believing victory was all but assured. Then humanity changed. Survival wasn't enough. Surrender was never an option. The war became something else, something monstrous. Humanity refused to die quietly. They fought with weapons the galaxy had never seen. They waged war without honor, without restraint. The Dominion had come expecting a civilized battle, but what they got was annihilation. Earth's soldiers turned to guerrilla warfare, using every trick, every trap, every ounce of desperation to claw back their world. And when they finally learned to fight in space, when they adapted, when they evolved, there was no stopping them. The first true victory came when the Resistance captured a Zellari warship. No one knew how the ragtag survivors did it, only that they had stormed the craft like demons from hell, slaughtering the alien crew with their bare hands when their weapons failed. And then they took the war to the stars. The galaxy watched in horror as the tides turned. Human warships, fast and relentless, struck deep into Dominion territory. Planets that had never known war burned as humanity avenged its fallen. The Zellari, once proud conquerors, now fled in terror at the sight of Earth's war banners. But it wasn't just war. It was something worse. It was personal. Humanity did not just conquer, they destroyed. They wiped out entire species that had allied with the Dominion. They burned entire civilizations to the ground. The peaceful races of the galaxy begged for mercy, pleaded for humanity to stop. But Earth had no mercy left. And so, the war continued. The galaxy trembled, and humanity, once the underdog, now stood as the monsters in the dark. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was vengeance. And it had only just begun. The Dominion's desperate retreat shattered the illusion of their invincibility. Before the war with humanity, they were the most feared empire in the galaxy, their war banners stretching across thousands of conquered worlds. Now, their fleets burned in space, their generals slain, their planets falling one by one. But the horror wasn't just in humanity's victories. It was in how they fought. The Dominion had always waged war with a sense of superiority. They enslaved, they conquered, but they never truly obliterated. Their wars were meant to end with surrender, with a new ruler taking the throne of a beaten world. Humanity had no such intentions. The first recorded footage of the war turning against the Dominion came from the fall of Vorsk 9, a planet that had served as a military outpost for centuries. Dominion soldiers, once elite and ruthless, were now the ones cowering. When human warships entered the system, there was no declaration, no warning. The sky simply erupted into fire. The humans did not land troops. They did not take prisoners. They bombed the world until the surface boiled, until the oceans turned to steam, until not a single Zalari remained. Then they moved on. Planet after planet suffered the same fate. Dominion soldiers abandoned their posts, throwing down their weapons in surrender, hoping for the mercy that humanity once valued. But mercy had died on Earth. The few survivors who escaped reported the nightmares that followed. Human ground troops weren't soldiers, they were executioners. They didn't fight for glory or honor. They fought to exterminate. Zalari colonies, even those that had never participated in the war, were torn apart. Cities were leveled, civilians butchered. The few Zalari that managed to flee the bloodbath told stories of human soldiers wearing the bones of their fallen enemies, of laughter echoing through the ruins of their worlds. The galaxy's other empires watched in horror. For centuries, they had believed humanity was weak. Now they realized their mistake. The Dominion's Grand Council, once so proud, was now a chamber of fear and desperation. Their leader, Supreme Chancellor Vorek, stood before his advisors, his reptilian features sunken and pale. "They will not stop," one of his ministers whispered. "We must surrender. We must offer them our empire." Chancellor Vorek shook his head. "You think they want our surrender?" His voice cracked. "They do not want peace. They do not want rule." He turned to the holographic projection of what had once been the Dominion capital world, now a wasteland of fire and bones. "They want us dead." And so the Dominion prepared for its final stand. They sent distress signals across the galaxy, begging for help. Some empires considered intervening, but fear held them back. If the Dominion, the most powerful empire in the galaxy, had fallen to humanity, what chance did they have? One by one they stayed silent. Humanity's name spread through the stars, no longer as an afterthought, but as a warning. The species that had once dreamed of exploring the galaxy had become its greatest nightmare, and the war was far from over. The Dominion's last strongholds trembled as humanity's fleet pushed further into their space. There was no slowing down, no hesitation. Every world that had once belonged to the Zalari was either burning or already turned to dust. The other galactic empires remained frozen in fear, watching from the shadows. They whispered among themselves, debating whether they should intervene, but none dared move. They had seen what happened to those who stood in humanity's way. The Dominion had been arrogant, powerful beyond measure, and yet their fleets now floated as debris in the void. The final battle loomed over Zelor Prime, the heart of the Dominion. The once mighty homeworld of the Zalari was no longer a symbol of power. It was a world drowning in fear. Its once proud cities were filled with refugees, the remnants of a species on the brink of extinction. The skies above Zelor Prime were a desperate mess of defense platforms, last-ditch barricades, and warships pulled from the farthest reaches of the Dominion. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Nothing would stop what was coming. The human fleet arrived in silence. No grand declarations, no demands for surrender. The galaxy had learned by now. Humanity did not waste time with words. They simply killed. Zelari warships, once the terror of the stars, broke apart within moments of contact. They fired everything they had: plasma lances, dark matter torpedoes, planet-killer warheads. But the humans had adapted. They learned from every battle, evolved with every loss. What had once been primitive ships of steel and fire were now fast, precise instruments of death. Within hours, the Zelari fleet was nothing more than wreckage. And then came the ground assault. Zelor Prime's surface became a slaughterhouse. Zelari warriors fought with desperation, knowing there was nowhere left to run. They fought harder than ever before, but humanity was something else entirely. They moved like demons in the night, armored soldiers tearing through lines of defense like an unstoppable plague. For every human that fell, 10 Zelari died. Civilians ran, mothers clutching their children, elders whispering prayers to gods that had abandoned them. They had thought surrender might still be an option, that perhaps, if they bowed low enough, humanity would show mercy. But mercy had not survived Earth's fall. The final hours of Zelor Prime were not a battle. They were an execution. The human forces spread through the cities like fire, leaving nothing untouched. The Zelari Royal Palace, a symbol of dominance for thousands of years, crumbled in flames. And then it was over. The last Zelari signal faded into the void. The Dominion was no more. The silence that followed was not relief. It was terror. The galaxy now understood. Humanity had not won the war. They had become the war. The once fractured human race, once divided by borders and nations, now had a single purpose. The rage that had fueled them through the Dominion's slaughter of Earth had not faded. It burned hotter than ever. And now, with no enemy left to fight, the question became, who was next? The other empires began sending frantic messages, desperate to reach the humans before they made their decision. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity had tasted vengeance. And they were not done. The silence that followed the fall of the Dominion was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. It wasn't peace. It wasn't relief. It was the quiet of something unnatural, something worse than war. Zelor Prime had been humanity's final message to the stars, a brutal testament to what happened to those who dared cross them. The planet had not just been conquered, it had been erased. The ruins of its once great cities smoldered under the dim light of its dying sun, and the corpses of the last Zelari lay scattered across the wasteland. There were no survivors, no prisoners, no negotiations. Humanity had made one thing clear. They were done being victims. Now they were the ones to be feared. Across the galaxy, empires trembled at the thought of what would come next. The galactic community, once arrogant and dismissive of Earth, was now paralyzed with terror. The most powerful rulers, the most ancient civilizations, held secret meetings, whispering in panicked voices. Would humanity stop? Or would they turn their sights on the rest of the galaxy? Desperate to prevent their own destruction, the most powerful empires sent envoys to humanity's new high command. Pleas for peace, offers of alliances, promises of reparations, anything to avoid the fate of the Dominion. The response from humanity came days later, a single transmission, 3 words: "We are watching." It was not a declaration of peace, it was a warning. The galaxy scrambled to interpret the message. Did it mean humanity was satisfied with their vengeance? Would they stand down now that their greatest enemy was gone? Or was this just the beginning? No one knew. And that uncertainty was the most terrifying thing of all. As the galaxy held its breath, reports began to emerge of something even worse. Human warships had been sighted far beyond Dominion space, deep in uncharted territories. They moved without transmitting signals, without declaring their purpose. They were ghosts in the void, appearing at the edges of different empires' borders before vanishing just as quickly. At first, the sightings were dismissed as paranoia. But then, ships started going missing. At first, it was only small scout vessels. Then, entire convoys vanished without a trace. Military outposts along the farthest reaches of the galactic core went silent. No distress signals, no debris fields, just gone. And then, the messages began. Distorted transmissions filled the emergency channels of every major empire, their signals twisted and broken by unknown interference. But through the static, one thing was clear: a voice, cold, mechanical, inhuman. You watched as they burned our world. Now we are watching you. The message was always the same, repeating endlessly until the transmissions cut off into empty silence. No one knew what it meant. No one wanted to find out. Entire empires began fortifying their worlds, preparing for a war that hadn't been declared. The most ancient civilizations, the ones that had stood unchallenged for thousands of years, now cowered behind their planetary shields, hoping that if they stayed quiet, humanity's gaze would pass over them. Trade routes changed overnight. Merchants refused to pass near human-occupied space. Pilots whispered of derelict warships floating in the void, their hulls carved with symbols in the old human tongue, reminders of Earth's suffering. Some believed humanity was testing them, waiting for the first empire to make a mistake. Others feared humanity no longer cared about strategy, that this wasn't about war anymore, that this was about revenge. The great rulers of the stars, the ones who had once dismissed Earth as nothing but a primitive world, could do nothing but sit in their gilded palaces, staring at the endless black of space, and wonder, was humanity still watching? Or had they already begun their hunt? The fear that gripped the galaxy had no name, no precedent. The Dominion had been wiped from existence, its people erased, its homeworld reduced to a charred wasteland. But the war had left behind something far worse than destruction. It had left behind silence. The humans were out there, watching, waiting. No one knew where they would strike next. Some empires fell into chaos, their leaders descending into paranoia, fortifying their worlds in desperate hope. Others tried to send envoys, emissaries bearing gifts, treaties, and unconditional surrender, pleas for mercy before a war had even begun. Humanity did not answer. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The galaxy became a graveyard of anticipation. Trade routes were abandoned. Fleets no longer patrolled their borders but hid within them. The great empires of the stars, races that had conquered whole sectors, that had ruled without challenge for millennia, no longer spoke in terms of power. Now they whispered only in fear. And then the disappearances began. Entire warships began vanishing from the void. At first it was small vessels, scouts, supply freighters, outposts in the farthest reaches of known space. There was no distress signal, no warning, just silence. The kind of silence the humans had left behind on Zalor Prime. Then the larger ships began to vanish. Battleships, carriers, flagships of powerful armadas, entire fleets disappearing without a trace. It was never in the heart of any empire, never an outright attack. Humanity was patient. They were hunting. The first message came from the Tiran Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Their fleet, a force that had once brought entire star systems to their knees, had been reduced to scattered fragments of debris. A lone escape pod drifted into the Tioran homeworld's orbit, its occupant barely clinging to life. The transmission they recovered was garbled, broken, filled with static. But the voice, oh, the voice. They understood perfectly. You sat and watched as they burned us. Now we will watch as you fall. Panic spread like wildfire. The Tioran government collapsed within days. Their colonies, once loyal and strong, revolted before humanity even reached them. They surrendered to the ghosts in the void before the first human warship even appeared. And then, just like that, the humans were gone. No invasion, no occupation, just silence. It was the beginning of a new era, one that no one had foreseen. Races that had stood at the peak of the galactic order began to flee their own homes. Worlds that had been inhabited for thousands of years were abandoned overnight. Entire civilizations packed their people into colony ships and sent them into the unknown, hoping to escape the gaze of Earth's wrath. But there was no escaping. The humans were everywhere, not in grand fleets, not in armadas that blotted out the stars. No, they moved like whispers in the dark, their ships appearing only long enough to remind the galaxy of their presence. They left no demands, no rules to follow, no ultimatums to obey, only fear, and fear was enough. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was at peace. Not by diplomacy, not by treaties, by terror. Where once there had been border conflicts, there was now retreat. Where once mighty warlords sought conquest, there was only hesitation. No one wanted to risk drawing humanity's attention. The stars had become quiet. No war, no conflict. Because in the darkness, in the endless void of space, the name of humanity was whispered with dread. They had been underestimated. They had been attacked. They had suffered. And now they were watching. And the galaxy would never know peace again.